This is Len Edgerly. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles. Merry Christmas from Sanibel Island, Florida, 2020. To celebrate this special day, I am bringing you a conversation I had Monday with Bryan Hudson, the founding pastor of New Covenant Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. We spoke about technology, the pandemic, travel, racism, Black Lives Matter, Kindle, Fox News, reading, and the meaning of Christmas. A wide-ranging discussion with a guest who's been on the show before and has been a long-time listener of the podcast, so I always enjoy getting together with Bryan. This is Christmas, so I am planning to spend a little less time behind the microphone today and get back to celebrating the day quietly with Deb and Darlene. We had a great, big, delicious catered roast beef dinner, and turns out I'm the only one that likes the pecan and the key lime pie that showed up, so I'm going to be snacking on that for the next few days, and we've had a great time. It's been chilly here in the low 60s, but sunny and very pleasant. I will postpone until next week the news and tech tips that I've been collecting recently for you, kind of get back on a regular schedule once I talk to you for the show next year. With that, let's get into my conversation with Bryan Hudson. Bryan Hudson's father and grandfather were both pastors, I believe. I think I remember that from when I talked to him last time. I couldn't find the details of it online, but I'm pretty sure that's right. He comes from a long line of pastors. And in addition, he is the author of 10 books. He's an adjunct professor, and he has a ministry technology consultant business. It's named Vision Communications, and they help people in the ministry, also just people, all kinds of organizations with digital media solutions. And Bryan has got a lot of expertise in that area. He has also helped establish a Christian Training Institute in Lagos, Nigeria, and has participated in 3 missions to Kenya in recent years. In addition to being a great preacher, he is a terrific photographer, and he's got a drone that he takes when he travels. And there was one that I'll have a link to in the show notes where he flew over the lighthouse here at Sanibel and took astounding pictures of what it looks like from way above the only view that I've ever seen of it from the beach. And I think that might be of interest to another friend of the podcast who is a preacher and a big fan of lighthouses, Mark Roberts in Irving, Texas. I began our conversation on Monday by asking Bryan how the pandemic has changed his church's mission this year.
Our ministry has not changed in terms of focus and mission. And that mission being to help people, to encourage, inspire, lead people to Christ. Our practices have changed because of COVID to protect our parishioners from COVID exposure. That has changed. Of course, all of us have had to change because of that. But the basic mission of the church has not changed. I heard someone say back in March and April, the church is closed. No, the church never closed, because worship is not confined to a building. Worship is from the heart. Worship is where you are with God, because God is not confined to a building. And so we have never seen even restrictions placed on churches, in my mind, have not been restrictions on worship, that we ought to participate in public policy, support. The governors have given mandates and guidelines on people meeting and not meeting. And I believe that some have been mistaken in viewing that as an attack on their faith. It is not, because worship is not confined to a building. So we've continued to serve God's purpose and mission, and we've adapted, as all of us should, to the COVID situation to keep our people safe.
That portion of the interview, which you just heard with Bryan, actually took place toward the end of our conversation, but it's good to have it here at the start as a starting place. Separately, I asked about his activities at the church this week leading up to Christmas, and so we'll enter into there, and then you'll hear the rest of the conversation as we had it.
We're doing outreach. We're sending some gifts over to some women at a facility that serves, we call them returning citizens, normally called ex-convicts, women who have children. There's a facility here in town that serves them and their children. So we're taking gifts to them. That's been done. We're doing the juvenile center here in the city is really a jail for kids, a jail for youth. And we've taken items over there. So we're doing outreach, taking dinners to seniors on this Wednesday. We're doing that. So our Christmas is about outreach. We don't do liturgical type things. We feel that it should be about Jesus. It's his birthday after all.
Yeah.
So we reach
exactly.
out. That's how we serve.
Now, during the pandemic, have you been able to meet in person at all at the church?
Yes. We've been meeting since early August. We have a small congregation in a big auditorium. So it's easy for us to come in, mask up, come in, spread out, take our mask off during the service, and mask back up before we leave. So we're having service. Now, that's been even that's not been every Sunday. We take off like one Sunday a month and do online service. Now, the mega churches have a big problem. They have hordes of people to contend with, and so they have a much more difficult scenario than we have for having service. Mm-hmm.
What does your online service look like? Are you using Zoom or another platform?
I use Ecamm. Are you aware of that? It's a Mac app called Ecamm.
Uh-huh.
It's a marvelous app. Even does interviews and such. Yeah, Ecamm lets us, at the church, we can tie in our professional cameras, our soundboard, and we can switch lower thirds, graphics, video roll-ins, and stream that out to a service called Restream. Now, Restream is a service that lets you take your stream to Facebook, YouTube, website. Yes, we have a lot of resources to help us get the word out, and backup systems. You know, live stream is always, the old saying is Murphy lives in the live stream, right? So we have backup systems as well.
Now, are the people attending the service, are they visible on the screen somehow, the way they would be in a big Zoom
No,
meeting?
they're not. No, we don't do that. Not for the service. Now, for Bible study, we use Zoom for Bible studies on Wednesday nights. Right. So we'll come on and I'll teach, we'll interact that way. But the Sunday service is more of a broadcast type format.
Sure. So the sermon that you did earlier this month that I listened to was titled What God is Doing in You During a Pandemic. And you used the text of Paul's letter to the Philippians, written while Paul was in prison, and as you point out, chained to a Roman guard around the clock. And how was that experience that Paul was writing from similar to what we've been going through in the pandemic with COVID?
Well, Paul's experience was obviously much worse, but the similarity is the constriction and movement. Obviously, there is the inability to be with people, to serve people directly. But the commitment to Christ and to the mission doesn't change because of circumstances. And that's how I relate that back to Paul. Paul also dealt with, I believe, mental anguish, emotional anguish, all the factors that go in with being confined. And again, Paul's situation was much worse than ours. However, we're seeing similar effects, right? So we have to think about how do we stay encouraged? How do we continue our disciplines of prayer and reading, which, of course, Paul couldn't do much of that. So we today are facing similar challenges, but not on the level that Paul faced. However, we learn from Paul that his commitment to Christ during difficulties is amazing and inspiring, and we draw from that.
Well, and as you point out, the word joy is used frequently in that letter, I think 16 times. And then you draw a distinction between joy and happiness. And happiness can affect a lot of us in different ways during the pandemic. But what was Paul passing along about joy?
Joy and happiness are different. Happiness, the word happenstance, relates to happiness. Happiness is circumstantial. So, for example, if I don't get my Starbucks, I won't be happy. If I can't take my vacations and go to my destinations I want to go to, I'm not happy. But however, joy is foundational. Joy goes back to my knowledge of my unchanging relationship with Christ. And regardless of circumstances, knowing Christ and being strong in my family and my wife, fundamentally blessed in life and needs are met, I have joy in knowing, despite the circumstances, I'm foundationally solid, I'm encouraged, and I can go forward in life. Happiness comes and goes. I tell folks happiness is like Kool-Aid. You make some up, or like lemonade. I say lemonade. Kool-Aid's an old school thing. Like right. Lemonade, you mix some up and you drink it. When it's gone, it's gone. You enjoy it while you have it. Comes and goes. Happiness rises and falls. We want to be happy. We do. But let's face it, happiness is circumstantial, whereas joy is foundational. Therefore, I can have joy at all times. I tell people that, for example, I like sunshine. All of us do. Well, it's cloudy here today in Indy. I'm not happy about the clouds and gloominess. But above the clouds, the sun is shining. The sun is always shining. And joy is that knowledge that the sun is always shining, even when I'm in a condition of cloudiness.
One of my favorite parts of that sermon was when you were speculating on what kind of conversations Paul might have had with that guard that was shackled to him in some way, long hours. I suppose they did it in shifts. What kind of conversations do you think those might have been?
I love to know that myself. I'm going to ask Paul about that if I later on in heaven. If Paul, tell me about that. This I know, as a preacher, you're going to take advantage of the opportunity. Right. So I've got this guy for 8 hours, whatever the shift was back then. I'm going to encourage him, ask him about his children, your wife, if you're married, how are you doing? And then talk about the Lord and pray for him. And I would imagine over time that became an encouragement to those guards. I don't see Paul beating them down and, hellfire and brimstone, because Paul's a preacher of love and compassion. And I do see that that must have been an amazing conversation, even to the point where there is indication in Scripture that the palace guard knew that Paul, was confined and was subject to talk and encourage and preach. That must have been amazing. Yeah.
You also were talking about how this period it's sort of almost like a period of enforced retreat. I mean, we were lucky enough to spend most of it up in Maine, and just me and my wife and the new puppy. And all of us are leading lives that have been more confined, and that can be a place where the inner life sort of develops because you're not traveling, you're not doing other things. Are you aware at this point, when you think of this year, how your own inner life as a pastor has changed because of the constraints that the pandemic has put on you?
I would say yes. All of us can probably admit to that and confess to that. I would say this, though, as a pastor, the pandemic has limited my work as relates to being close to people, touching people, going to the hospitals. That has been affected adversely. But as a teacher, as a person, as a Christian, I've grown through more reading, more study, more writing. I've grown closer to the Lord, and of course through communication with people, closer to them as well. But as a pastor, the pastoral work in terms of being with people has changed. Certainly, we continue to pastor in different ways. Pastoring is not just only being with people; it's praying for people, encouraging people, teaching now through live stream and such. But yes, I've grown. I've grown through the challenges of this difficult season, and of course, through the heartbreaks. We've had people not die from COVID. Thank God. Our members have been solid and safe this whole season. However, loved ones have suffered from COVID. We've had family members who've passed, and that's difficult because, of course, funerals are now restricted. When persons are even sick in the hospital, you can't even go see them. We've had situations where loved ones couldn't see a loved one before that person died. And that is tremendously heartbreaking. So, yes, I've grown because I've committed to best practice, to Christ. But then looking around me and beyond our membership, I see people have not practiced safe practices and masks and all the rest, and some have suffered for that. And that's heartbreaking. But I've grown, yes, I've grown deeply with the Lord.
Well, and you, I know, love to travel, and you take your drone with you and some cameras. And I was inspired I don't know if it was on Sanibel. Have you ever been here at Sanibel?
Yes, I'll send you my Sanibel video. I got one flying around Sanibel. I have one.
Thinking of your travel and how much of it you did, and you haven't done it for a year, how do you think you'll experience travel on the other side of this? What have you learned about travel in your life by having a year without it?
Well, first of all, I've learned I've not been happy.
That goes back to the other topic.
That's a good example, right? Not being happy with that's concerned. Certainly, I look forward to traveling again. As you say, I do love to travel. Now, I've taken some road trips. I've driven up to Michigan. I go up to St. Joseph, Michigan from Indianapolis. I go up there and take a day trip, and I'll sit out on the beach on the lakefront before it got cold. I've done some day trips, but as far as extensive travel, I haven't had any, so I'm missing it. But going back to travel, I think everything has changed, right? Even after COVID, I'm looking to be safe. I'm looking to do best practice. I understand that the vaccine is out now, but it's been really explained as not so much a switch to turn off COVID as much as a dial to dial it down over time as the vaccines are being received. So I don't expect to get back to my regular travel probably till next summer, right?
Yeah.
So I do miss it. However, I'm encouraged. I have joy, right? So joy sustains me in the midst of my unhappiness about the lack of travel, which is a major first world problem, right? Let's face it. Our kinds of travel are first world problems. And I've been to Africa 6 times. So I know how the rest of the world lives. And I understand I've been around malaria and yellow fever. So I understand how to do best practice from years and years ago. So this COVID pandemic didn't change my willingness to do what it takes to be safe. Because I've been to mission trips, I've had to be safe, and I understand how to do that.
When we spoke last time, 4 years ago, we talked about the media, and you were doing summer camps with youth to help them be creators as well as consumers of media. And you had a great image that I remembered of that when you're trying to tame the media, instead of just, blocking it out, which you can't do, it's kind of like breaking a wild horse. You have to figure out ways to engage with the reality of the media. The media, I think, has probably changed considerably in the last 4 years. If you think of that bucking horse metaphor, you're almost, maybe you're back to riding a bull instead of a horse or something. Yes. But what do you think the most significant changes in the media environment are now compared to 5 years ago or so, and how what's the best strategy for pressing onward in the midst of it?
That's a great question, Lynn. There's so much to that. For one, I believe there is a branch of media that is still professional and disciplined, and there's really no problem there. But as it relates to social media, where we have these various apps that even kids get into these apps and go hide and do, alternate identities and all these different ways of using media. And that's certainly wild. As a wild horse, the horse is stronger and the horse is wilder as it relates to some social media. But my answer is the same. I would say the key is training. Training young people, training children, training youth, not so much to avoid it, but how to use it. I think sometimes people get overzealous and say, well, you shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. Well, I understand there's some cases where that's certainly true. But better yet, if it's something that can have redeeming value, then let's train how to use it, what to avoid, when to use it, when not to use it. And I would say that's how I respond even to this day, to examine the sources of media, the types being used, to show young people, for example, that there is journalism. It is an honorable profession. I tell young people, I taught a course at a Christian college for 4 years in which I explained to them that a real journalist can actually be sued and go to jail for something they write that's inaccurate, okay? Now, people on blogs and Twitter, there's no accountability. Yeah. And that's the big difference in media. There's accountable media and unaccountable media. And I encourage young people that don't look at all media as bad, as fake. There is journalism, in which I'm a minor in journalism, and I understand the responsibility of it. And that's a noble profession. I want to encourage young people to examine journalism. But the rest of this, it's free speech. It's America. I understand it, but yet there's no accountability with these blogs and Facebook posts. So we need to encourage them, train them how to use it and not abuse it. And abuse, by the way, means abnormal use. Use is abnormal use. That's what abuse is. And so don't abnormally use things that are intended to be used a certain way.
Exactly. Well, your latest book you published in October, titled Biblical and Social Justice, What Is It? An Everyday Person's Guide to Understanding Justice and the Role of the Church in Our Society. What's the message that you hope readers will take most directly from your latest book?
I would like the reader to understand that biblical justice is related to what Christians should do. There is this perception and this practice that Christians think we ought to impose on the whole world what we believe the Bible says. And that's not really what the Bible teaches, nor is it how our country was established. So part of my goal is to kind of reorient, re-educate the reader to what the Bible says about justice as relates to how we should live as Christ followers. And then social justice is how we serve from that position of walking with God, being integral, living the way he wants us to live, and I can serve the people around me from that position. And I'm very concerned, as we've seen in recent cycle, Christians, evangelicals especially, literally wanting to take over the government and want to use government to do God's bidding. And that's actually unconstitutional because the framers intended the nation would not be governed by the Bible or governed by a religious sect or religious, even Christianity, as much as I believe in Christ. That's not the reason they formed this country. So the book goes to a lot of history related to how our nation was founded, removing the romanticism. For example, the notion that we're founded as a Christian nation. And, well, come on. Of the 55 framers, 26 of them owned slaves. 16 depended on the slave labor as income. Now, unless that's a Christian principle, then we're not a Christian nation in that sense. Now, I understand that religious liberty has resulted in the majority of citizens claim to be Christians. But we also have Muslims. We have people of all religions, Jews, Jewish people here in the States, United States. And that's really the framers' vision, in my view, was to have a pluralistic republic in which we're all citizens and we share in that in common. So the book goes into all those facets. I'm concerned about also, Lynn, about what Carter G. Woodson called the miseducation of children. And miseducation is a problem where we have Christian schools, of which my children attended, in which I found out, to my chagrin later, they were taught things that were not accurate, such as slave owners being Christians and slave owners leading slaves to Christ and this kind of stuff. Well, if you're a Christian, why would you have slaves in the first place? Well, there are a lot of things that have been taught and believed, Lynn, over the course of many decades that while my book won't solve all the problems, I just hope to be a voice of reason, a voice of insight, and to educate and inspire the readers from one person's point of view. I'm not claiming to, know everything, but from my experience, I'm hoping to, and I believe I've seen evidence that the book is opening eyes to what it is, what justice is from a biblical standpoint, what justice is socially. Then there's a third aspect of civil justice, which is jurisprudence, the laws of our land. That's a whole separate matter. I'm not dealing so much with civil justice as much as justice as relates to how we should live before God and serve the world around us. So those are some of the major themes of the book.
And you talk about race in the book and the role of the white church, sort of shockingly being apologists for slavery back before and after the Civil War. And I know that my own experience as a white person of privilege was changed by the George Floyd killing and the aftermath and just the obviousness of what is broken in the country in terms of systemic racism. There are a lot of different ways for a white person to navigate this moment. I don't think there's any turning away from it, but I'm not sure what the most effective or the most useful way of thinking about the opportunities I might have to be on the right side of history in my own little world here. But how would you address that topic?
Good question. Racism really is the fruit of two things: white nationalism and white supremacy. Now, white nationalism is the notion that some believe that the nation should reflect white culture, white values, white history as it is taught. Now, white supremacy, of course, is much worse. The idea that white folks are superior and that others should be subjugated. And that really is the cause for racism as against black folk. Well, people say, well, aren't black folk racist? Yeah, some are. But racist black folk are more of a nuisance. I mean, the racist black people won't keep you from getting your house and getting a job and all the rest. But racism, among those who are 80% or thereabout of the population is devastating toward others. So hence, the responsibility is greater.
I want to break in here again with a clarification that Bryan emailed me Monday after he listened to his recording of our conversation. He wrote, "Len, listening to my responses to your questions, I did not intend to imply that 80% of white people are racist. What I had hoped to say was that racism is present or expressed more among the white population who are the majority." And that's how I understood Bryan's original comment, but I wanted to include his email just to underline that point. Personally, I was struck by his gentle and humorous suggestion that racist black folk are more of a nuisance to white people than the reverse. Racist black people won't keep you from getting your house and getting a job and all the rest, but racism among those who are among 80% or thereabout of the population is devastating. That hit home with me because I think in the past I have perceived a sort of equivalence between blacks who think they are superior to whites as well as whites who think they're superior to blacks. And if each race controlled an equal amount of society's benefits, that might be kind of a meaningful comparison. But clearly that's not the case. People like me account for around 80% of the U.S. population, and an even bigger share of the money and the power which affect everyone's lives, especially minorities. To me, that it's an example of the benefit of having friends who are African American, that I can have these conversations with. Baratunde Thurston is another that comes to mind. And, they're edgy. I'm kind of nervous to bring these topics up. But, boy, when I do, with someone I trust and who is such a good resource like Bryan, all of a sudden I'm looking at something from a completely different point of view. And that comment with the, and the lightness of laughing about it, that racist black folk are more of a nuisance. And at first, I didn't even understand his point. What do you mean they're just a nuisance? But then I realized that the disparity in position in society and the systemic racism and the effect it has, that's right. If the 20% of blacks, there are some among them who think I'm a bad person because I'm white, it doesn't keep me from living where I want to live or working where I want to work. It's more of a nuisance. But I don't think I ever would have figured that one out without having a friend like Bryan to talk to about this. So we'll return now to more of Bryan's answer to my question about the role white people can play in addressing systemic racism.
And to your question, in my research, and what I have found fruitful and useful is accountability. Accountabilities. For example, among folks that I circulate with, mostly black, some white, if someone makes a statement that in my perception is racist or derogatory and just plain wrong, I will speak up. I'll correct. You shouldn't talk with people like that. For example, there are black folk who say, going back to what Malcolm X said, the white people are devils, They're all just a bunch of devils, which is a foolish statement. But when somebody says it, I respond to it. And I believe if in other circles, say if, for example, Lynn, you've heard this, maybe heard somebody in your circle say something derogatory about black folk, well, then we address it, right? And what if everybody took responsibility to hold accountable people within our spheres of influence? That would make, I think, the most impact of thwarting racism and stopping the white nationalists and supremacist leanings than anything else we could do. Obviously, legislation is important. You can't change a person's heart by the law, but the law can restrain people who are evil and intent on doing wrong. Other than that, education, because racism is learned. And that goes back to the previous point of miseducation, where children are not being trained to understand how America works, the nature of humanity, that we're all made in God's image and likeness, and there are no superior or inferior people, and that we all have equal footing in standing before God. And that's a fundamental truth, that if children learn that and are taught that, they'll grow up resisting racist urges, or at least they'll understand that the person who's expressing those racist points of view, they've got a problem. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's part of it. It's a big question. It's a huge solution, and my answers are part of just a number of good answers and responses. I've heard about, for example, there are conversations going on, like racial reconciliation conversations, and that's good. I take the all the above approach to these things. Now, what I do believe is counterproductive is when people make statements like, I read this yesterday. Someone said, there's only one race, the human race, which I agree with that, by the way. But the person went on to say, there's no black, there's no white. We should stop talking about it because that's what creates racist feelings. I said, well, no, now you're going too far. Okay, that's about in Revelation. There's a scripture where the text defines or shows a picture of people in heaven. Says they're all people of all nations and tribes and tongues before the throne, saying essentially that in heaven, as I understand it, people will have ethnic identity because that's how God made us. Yes, one human race, but many ethnicities. And so when we teach children to value all people, then I believe we're on the way to helping our society become better.
One thing I've noticed is that Black Lives Matter has become, I would say, problematic as a rallying identity. Mayor Pete, in his book Trust, I noticed without any fanfare, he never mentions Black Lives Matter in that book. He does mention the movement for Black Lives. And I think in your book you point out that there is a specific organization that has the name Black Lives Matter, and there's also a more general movement. I ran into it with my own father, who's a man of good faith. 93 was quite a leader in Boston for creating affordable housing. And he really got stuck on Black Lives Matter, partly because of things he heard on Fox that, one of the founders was Marxist. I think there's some history there that gives enough troubling stuff. And then in his assisted living place, they had quite a conversation, and he was brave enough to say, Black Lives Matter is a term that bothers me. And they came up with some other graceful way to put a sign on their front door. And this is Massachusetts, a pretty liberal place, that showed that this was a community that was aware of this issue, but stepped back from using those three words. What's your experience of where we are with those three words?
That statement, Black Lives Matter, has been successfully cast as something bad and evil, by those who believe that. And my position is Black Lives Matter. And I always say that I'm talking about the human statement, not the organization, not even the movement, but the actual statement, Black Lives Matter, capital B, small L, small M, Black Lives Matter. Not Black Lives Matter, capital B, capital L, right, capital M. Mm. See, that denotes the movement. So whenever somebody says, don't say something, and I think it's right, I just say it louder. That's my position. There's a story in the Bible where there's a man named Bartimaeus who was blind, who heard Jesus was coming, and he shouted and said, Jesus, have mercy on me. And it said, man, be quiet. Now, the custom was that those who were lepers and infirmed were supposed to be quiet because they were considered to be cursed and they should not be speaking out. But Bartimaeus, when Christ got closer, the more he said, Lord, have mercy on me, right? And my philosophy is, if it's right, say it louder. Keep saying it. In other words, don't let people train you. You train them. That's why you hear black pastors, black folk. We keep saying Black Lives Matter, and we keep saying it and posting it because it's our view that it matters. Black lives matter. Say, well, blue lives matter. Well, yeah, of course, all lives matter. But when the hurricane was bearing down on the Gulf of Mexico, on Louisiana and Mississippi back last fall, we didn't say all states matter. We said let's pray for Mississippi, pray for Louisiana, pre-position supplies because the hurricane is coming. And so those of us who are on the forefront of these matters, yeah, we understand the argument against it, the accusations of Marxism, in which I ask people to define what is a Marxist. They don't even know what a Marxist is. People say it's Marxism. What's a Marxist? They don't know. Well, in the light of that barrage of negativity against that statement, I choose to educate. I choose to confront negativity with education and emphasizing Black Lives Matter as a matter of human concern. That's how I respond to that.
Yeah, that's helpful. Pete in his, in the campaign, I often heard him make a distinction between people who disagree with each other in good faith versus those who are not speaking or acting in good faith. And as an example, he defended his decision to go on Fox by saying the people in the audience that listen to Fox, they're people of good faith, and shame on us if we don't tell them how we see the world. And then he suggested that some of the Fox opinion show hosts maybe were not acting in good faith. And you pointed out that Dr. King, in his 1963 letter from the Birmingham jail, was appealing to white clergy of good faith.
Yes.
I a couple of times I tried to ask Pete a question in some of these rallies we had. I find that a difficult standard in my own life because my motives are frequently mixed. I think I'm speaking, some truth for my family or something, but, maybe there's some ego in there. And how do you know when you're acting or speaking in good faith, and kind of what's the definition of it?
That's a great question. It may differ with different persons. By good faith, I mean to be earnest and sincere, and in reaching others who I perceive of good faith, or I hope there's someone out there who has a similar perspective as myself, someone who's willing to change. And so Dr. King, with all the abuse he faced and the hatred he faced, he still believed there are people out there, he didn't know who they were exactly, but he felt they'd be preached and loved and put his message out, that those people would identify themselves, that they would be identified, through his work. And it happened that way, that over time, people revealed themselves as willing to change. They stepped out from those who were racist and committed to the destruction of himself and the whole movement. And in the midst of those people, there are always people who are willing to change. And that's the risk we take, Lynn, is we you go on Fox News and think, people think, well, Fox News is a bunch of vipers, Well, no. There are a couple of news people in Fox News. There's some journalists over there, career journalists. Now, of course, there's Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson, and they're all, they're lost cause in a sense. But for Pete to go over there was correct. I remember President Obama went on Fox News, and with Bill O'Reilly, I believe, and and so it's important to reach out. It always is, not to try to force change, but to hope there's maybe people who are willing to listen and willing to change. It's like preaching. We preach the gospel, and I preached, for 40 years, and the people have ignored me and walked away, and, I've been out on the street preaching. Somebody approached me to threaten to beat me up, and I went back out the next day, because it's worth it for those who do respond. And that's the part of having a sense of mission and a sense of purpose. And civil servants have that. Politicians who are really civil servants in heart, they have that desire to risk, the dangers to reach those who can be helped. So that's why we do it.
Yeah. Well, I know Indiana's a big state, but did your path ever cross Pete's in the years when he was mayor and you were in Indy, and you have any personal encounters with him?
No, in fact, I never heard of Mayor Pete until he began to run for president. I mean, South Bend is one of our bigger cities. Indianapolis is the capital city, and we're like almost 200 miles distant from South Bend. And so we typically don't pay attention to mayors of cities, except the big cities, right? Yeah, so I'm aware of him only after he began to run for president. Yeah, so I've never met him, never heard of him, until he began to run for president. Yeah.
Well, I remember I was backing the governor of Colorado at first, and when I first heard that the mayor of South Bend was running for president, I was just irritated. I said, well, we haven't got time for this, and then it turned out to be kind of a spectacular candidate. How are you reading books these days? What's your technological mix of paper and gadgets for when you're curling up and using some of the time available to you to read a good book?
Well, I don't curl up. So what I do, Glenn, actually, I am 75% through Barack Obama's book, A Promised Land. And I'm reading on Kindle, and I'm listening text to speech. That's how I consume a lot of books. Yeah, I actually listen. I listen intently, and I listen to, now you can enable text to speech. It's a computer voice, but I become very accustomed to that voice, and I can listen to it at almost twice the speed with comprehension. So I'll listen, and I'll stop, and I'll highlight portions of the text. When I'm studying, I'll sit down and actually read. I'll read with my eyes. I'll read a book. But if it's for pleasure, I typically, Lynn, actually listen. I prefer to listen to text to speech. I don't like audiobooks. I prefer to have it computer voice, believe it or not.
Why do you prefer that to the... Because Obama reads his... I'm switching from hearing him read it to reading it. But why do you prefer the text to speech as opposed to the audible version?
Well, because it saves me some money. I don't have to buy an audio book version. No.
Right.
But then for many years, I've been using this technique, and I've become accustomed to it.
I see.
And I prefer it. I've got I use for the iPhone, I use the Alex voice for my app, which is a very good sounding computer voice. So that's how I consume pleasure reading, is more by listening. And I will sit down and read if I have to study. If it's something technical, I will study, like sermon preparation. I'll read. I'll pull books off my shelf sometime. I still like physical books. I just think it's a great technology. Books are actually a technology.
They've withstood the test of time, haven't they?
There's no battery needed, obviously. But I do like my tech. Yeah, so I've been reading that way. Now, listening, I can drive. I can drive also when I'm listening. I'm so busy with other things that to sit down and just read for 3 or 4 hours is very difficult for me to do that. That's
the not curling up. You're too much in motion to be curling up with a book.
I don't curl up. No. When I curl up, I'm watching Netflix. I'm watching a movie in my home theater. That's how I curl up.
That makes sense.
I like nonfiction. I don't read any fiction. I just like nonfiction. I want to get into fiction. I do, but my life is so much oriented to helping people and making a difference and helping people survive and thrive. I want to learn all I can. And so reading for me is always educational. So nonfiction is my preferred medium or genre.
Well, now this will be up on Friday, which is Christmas. And maybe we could close with a Christmas greeting or a way that you understand Christmas each year. I think you're kind of familiar with the Kindle Chronicles audience because you're part of it. But what words would you offer?
Well, I want to say that Christ came for all of us. He didn't come just for the Christians. He came for the whole world. Unto us a child is given, a son is born. And Jesus came to bring us to our best life through transformation of our hearts, then of our minds. And Christmas has always been for me more than, and the gifts are great, the gift exchange and such are great. But the reality has never left me that Christ came to save. He came to help. He came to heal. He came to make a difference. And I would say, let Christ make the difference in your life. Let him do what he was sent to do. Make a difference. Make the change. Bring the help and the strength that we all need, especially during this time. And if we find ourselves in trouble, we find ourselves not living as we should, don't run from God, run to God. and that's important. And love each other. Oh, my goodness, we have to love each other. We could do a whole other show about the failures of Christianity, but we already know that. But, someone once asked the question, what's the best thing about Christianity? Someone said Jesus. What's the worst thing? Someone said Christians. So we have a problem, but we have an answer. And with all the foolishness we've seen this past election cycle, Lynn, it hasn't diminished my faith in God at all. In fact, I'm strengthened in faith and wanting to help people all the more and show Christ in the light, the true light for which he was sent.
Thank you. I have been speaking with Bryan Hudson, founding pastor of New Covenant Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. Thanks very much, Bryan. Merry Christmas to you, your family, your congregation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lynn.
Well, I'm really grateful for that chance to talk to Bryan Hudson this Christmas week, and I'm glad I risked asking questions that I was frankly a little nervous about getting into because I learned so much. And the other thing I learned a lot about was when we were talking about Black Lives Matter and the different ways of looking at it and hearing him talk about capitalizing B in black but not lives matter, that it's a statement of human truth as opposed to an organization, and that he wasn't giving an inch to people that were using problems or issues with the organization as a way to undermine the truth of what has been rallying people in the protests all year. So it was a pretty savvy explication of the issues around those three words that I found extremely useful and helpful. I also was struck by what he was talking about, the power that each one of us has, including me, to take responsibility for speaking clearly about white nationalism, white supremacy. There again, splitting those two up is something that I hadn't really thought about. The difference between saying, well, this is a country that should be for whites. Well, that's a whole issue about the Constitution and the framers. Or people that think white people are better than anybody else. And that's, as he said, a more dangerous view. And just to see those in two different categories was helpful. And then, having seen that, if I come up against people who are expressing views toward white nationalism or white supremacy, frankly, it doesn't happen that often in my circle, but it does happen. And the next time it does, I hope I'll be able to speak as clearly and with as much empathy, faith, and good humor as I hear in the voice of Pastor Bryan Hudson. That's it for this week. We've had a quiet Christmas here. As I said, we went out and saw the sunrise on the beach today. That was really beautiful, coming up sort of over Naples. And we've been Zooming with family members and reading The Night Before Christmas on Caribou with the grandsons. It's all the virtual ways of touching people this season, including attending a great service at my daughter's church in Boston, Arlington Street Church, a historical church that has absolutely mastered the media and beautiful music, choir singing, and quite an inspiring service last night for Christmas Eve. I don't have a guest yet for next week. I made an inquiry sort of via someone I know about having Mackenzie Scott now, I guess she's known after the divorce. And, of course, she made a lot of news with her kind of trailblazing philanthropy that she conducted leading up to Christmas. I'd love to talk to her about that, about her fiction. And in my inquiry, I said, obviously I'm not going to be asking her anything about Amazon. So it's a long shot, but I feel like my request will at least be put in front of the people representing her and making commitments about her schedule. So that's a long shot, but boy, that'd be quite exciting to have a chance to talk to her. 2020 has been quite a year. I appreciate you being with me each week for these conversations, and 52 fascinating people that we've talked to, at least fascinating to me. I hope they've been of interest to you. And I am going to return to providing tech tips and talk about news as well, so that we keep the format here. We've got a format here that's pretty well established after 12 years, and once in a while it is convenient to work out to have the show be just the interview. But I think the commitment I've got to you is that this is a place that you might learn some things about Kindle and other technology that would be useful to you. So I like it when I can pass along things like that. And I hope you have a happy new year and all the best in 2021. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles in Sanibel, Florida. Thanks for listening. Bye.